Universities in peril, the information age renaissance is over. Hey, it's Prince of Queens, and in walking to my chiropractic physical therapy appointment earlier, I looked at the beautiful skyline and thought very distinctly, today is the first day of the rest of my life. You see, I'm getting older, and it turns out my work is just beginning, so I have to stay somewhat healthy and be fine with the hard work to come, no excuses. Apparently, it is up to us as a free society to offer education online because students are not currently getting it. They are being indoctrinated. The universities are no longer delivering higher education properly from all the reports I've gathered both from my personal network of people in academia and education, the footage of recent ridiculous SJW protests, and talks from scholars I respect like Gad Saad, Jonathan Haidt, and Christina Hoff Sommers. The schools themselves seem to actively rob students of critical thinking and open exchange of ideas. How did this happen? I ask myself. I'll have to bring it back to my personal education, which I am extremely grateful for. Being born in 1982, I come from a weird section in terms of generations. While I am technically a millennial, people say often that my age range is on the strange cusp between Generation X and Generation Y. From my observation, the people my age have a distinct perspective about the world based on our personal relationships with the internet and how it influenced our educations. You see, I started using the internet heavily around 1996 when it was strictly for nerds and underground ravers, who at the time were largely pretty nerdy. From the age of 15 or so onward, I was able to communicate with very well-educated people decades older than myself, and I consider that a very strong part of my education. Everything I learned both in my extremely forward-thinking high school and college I could discuss with my elders on the internet. And early on especially, the people using the internet were almost unanimously fairly intelligent, because those were the people who didn't mind being called nerds. So although I delved into various humanities, social sciences, and things like gender studies to a small but certain degree, I was able to take it with a grain of salt and add the skepticism of my online networks to any idea that rubbed me the wrong way. If something I read in class sounded stupid, I'd ask my older friends about it, and they'd often confirm that yes, in fact, it was stupid. I had a feminist writing teacher or two in university that I could tell hated me because I strongly criticized the work of, say, intersectional feminist saint Audre Lorde, who was a black lesbian. They seemingly couldn't fathom the fact that a young gay white male would choose to criticize somebody like Audre Lorde that these teachers both worshipped as an author and as somebody with many forms of intersecting oppressions. I think initially they just thought that it was my privilege showing or whatever. However, as the class discussions went on, it became evident that I had solid arguments to back up my criticisms of her writing, and they didn't really have any good answers for them. I walked away confident that I was mostly right. Audre Lorde is mostly just kind of whiny. I cannot say for certain that the skepticism of my feminist teachings in college was just because my mind was always skeptical, or if it was because of my simultaneous secondary education online. I think it was both, which is probably why I, even more than my peers at the time, was constantly enthralled with the internet. I was using social media in its infancy on message boards, mailing lists, and the prototype versions of Facebook like Friendster, MySpace, and Tribe.net. I would definitely say that there was a period in academia where the internet was infusing into our educations, and some of my college instructors definitely understood this a lot better than others. I had a great journalism teacher in the year 2000 who was the first person to tell us that Google was the only search engine we really needed at the time, and exactly why this was. In that class, we relied heavily on the internet to learn about the state of journalism. Other teachers demanded us to buy massive photocopy pamphlets. Passages of books written a few years prior or as far back as the 70s were given to us while being considered contemporary. One thing that was very clear during my education was that some teachers were with the times and understood that we were going through an information age revolution, and others resisted it heavily. Those teachers tended to be the feminist-oriented thinkers and the ones with more ideologically driven social science and humanities-oriented schools of thought. You see, I believe that ideologies like feminism and what is now known as social justice are usually passed down more firmly and directly from person to person, whereas a more constructive pursuit of knowledge would be to analyze the world around you with the most up to date information available and go from there. And what updates faster than the internet? Eventually, society caught up with myself and my internet obsessed peers, and we began to see more of a mix between online information gathering and university driven academia. More and more online courses were being offered, and academic papers are easy to find published online, usually with a fee to download them. More and more professors were uploading lectures on YouTube, and truthfully, making a lot of studies no longer necessary to attend university to learn about at all. However, universities have to stay in business and they have become increasingly corporate. So, what happened? Well, it's hard to say exactly. I don't know if this was an organic, natural selection oriented shift that came about as a result of individual academics having to justify their own existence as educators in a technologically developed society that has made their occupations somewhat obsolete, or if there was careful planning. What I do know is that it has gotten to the point that students at universities and even high schools are being taught massive amounts of misinformation, to the point that I am extremely worried, and I am certainly not the only person who has noticed this. When almost every young person believes that only white people can be racist because supposedly white people invented racism, we have a problem. Any critical thinker should know that racism is not something that can be invented, but merely discovered, like electricity. When pressed about why the dictionaries have never changed the definition of racism, and the students tell you white people invented the dictionary, there is more evidence of a severe problem. White people invented the entire English language, but that doesn't mean they use some sort of trickery in their semantics to oppress black people with word definitions. And besides, the dictionaries are updated every year by a committee, which does not only include white people. This is not hard information to learn. What is going on? When I have to spend my time on the internet explaining the powers that corporations have in our society, corporate law, Citizens United, and the very basics of the globalist oligarchy to a young feminist who thinks we simply live in a patriarchy, and then she calls me a conspiracy theorist for doing my best to explain to her what I learned in high school and college, which I verified with my studies online numerous times, well, again, we have a problem. What I truthfully believe is that sociology, gender studies, and similar humanities type courses can no longer compete with the combined force of the internet. But without their teaching positions, the academics that majored in these studies would have no employment options because those are not employable fields to major in. Therefore, it seems that from a business standpoint, at least, they benefit the most from indoctrination of their students into misinformation because it closes them off from the seemingly obvious objective truths, which are becoming more and more abundantly easy to find on the internet. Students aren't just told incorrect information, they are being trained to reject correct information when they come across it from people online. If I had $1 for every time a student told me that the videos I linked them with were irrelevant and that I should instead be linking them with peer-reviewed academic gender studies paper or supposedly reputable news sources like The Guardian UK or The New York Times, well, I could at least certainly buy a fancy dinner. You see, considering scholars like Christina Hoff Sommers, who speak out against this miseducation, are both protested on college campuses and now have even had her videos censored from YouTube, we can assume all of this is probably not an accident. The information age renaissance I remember from my high school and college years seems to be ending, or maybe it's just completely over. It is now up to us to fight against potential dark ages coming. I hope you'll join me. If we can't have free higher education for all, and the public higher education that might soon be offered is of this standard, we need to make it free. We need to make videos and stuff. Stay tuned.